Our reforms are working. Our transition from a crisis-based business model to a reliability-based business model is showing results. Our combination of conservative grid management and reforms here at PUC and ERCOT have also shown results. Brad will speak to the specific numbers in the SARA and CDR, but going into this summer, I want Texans to know that we will continue to operate with a margin of safety, meaning that we'll have more reserves than before. We're going to continue operating with an abundance of caution, meaning that we'll bring more generators online sooner rather than later. We have a higher reserve margin going into this summer than we did last summer, and this grid is more reliable than it has ever been before. The reforms I speak of were tested last weekend. As you know, we had record-breaking heat, record-breaking demand for electricity, combined with low wind generation and an unusually high number of generators tripping offline in a short period of time meant that we had tight grid conditions. The combination of these factors led us to issue a conservation request. As you know, conservation is another tool in our toolkit that we use to ensure reliability, and it's important to note that in the past, before we transitioned to this reliability-based business model, in the past, under similar circumstances, no conservation notice would have been issued. This was ERCOT being proactive about the tight grid conditions and informing Texans of their ability to help contribute to grid reliability by conserving electricity. We were tested last weekend, and our reforms worked. ERCOT's new control of generator outages means that we had more power online going into the weekend than we would have otherwise, and the extra reserves that we have been procuring meant that we had an additional margin of safety when generators started tripping offline. Brad?
Thank you. I'll certainly answer any questions you've got relative to the SARA and the CDR. I know there's a lot of information out there. I think bottom line for each of you is that we feel very confident about this summer. Our reserves have gone up relative to last summer. In fact, 4 years ago in 2019, we had roughly about 8 to 9% reserves. Last year we had around 12%, or 2 years ago we had 12%. Last year we had 15 to 16, and this year we have 23% reserves. So you can see our reserves have grown over each of those years. We feel very confident about our position this summer. Now, as always, we have to be careful about those times where it is both dark and still. We have to make sure that we have the dispatchable generation to balance our fleet when wind and solar are not available to us. But we're very happy to have that wind and solar development we've had over the past few years, and it is making our grid stronger. I also want to address this past week. This past week is an example of ERCOT doing what ERCOT needs to do to prepare for these types of events. We're having an extraordinary May, what may be the all-time hottest May on record. We're certainly trending that way today. And so with the all-time hottest May on record, at the same time that we also have a great number of our generators, our dispatchable generators that are offline, that are doing regular maintenance, it became very important that ERCOT began to plan for what happened on Friday as much as a week ahead. And we were bringing units back out of outages, making sure they'd be prepared for us. We were communicating with the market, making sure that each of our market participants, all of the industry, was prepared for this event. When Friday came up, we were surprised by several generating units that failed right close to peak. Absent that, there would not have been a conservation request. There would not have been probably much communication that had gone out, because it would have been a normal Friday that was very hot. But with those 6 generators tripping off between about 12:30 and 4 o'clock that afternoon, it became apparent that we needed to take action. Now, our action on conservation is something that I hope that each of you will understand. Conservation is a good thing. Conservation is what we should do every day in our lives. Conservation is how we treat our use of water during the summers. And when it's very hot, I hope that each of you will turn to conservation as a way to both lower your bill as well as to help all of us in the market. And that's what we called for. In the past, we would call for conservation at the last moment, or even beyond that, when we are already into an emergency condition. But now we're moving conservation up early because we know that all Texans can help each other and help the grid to be even stronger. So we're doing that in advance of these situations. What we found on Friday was a rapidly changing situation for the grid, and we decided to make a call for conservation on that Friday and throughout the weekend. And it worked. Texans responded. And I want to tell all of you that responded, thank you. Thank you on behalf of the state. Thank you on behalf of ERCOT. Not only those that responded to conservation, which essentially brought 300 to 400 megawatts of additional generation back to ERCOT, but also all of those generators that worked very quickly to bring those units back and return them to service. They were available to us on Saturday and Sunday and allowed us to keep the grid reliable for all Texans. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. As I said, this grid is more reliable than it has ever been before, and we're going to continue improving reliability. As you know, this commission adopted a blueprint for reform last December, and we are moving forward with phase 2 of implementing those reforms, which will prioritize long-term reliability and transition the economics of the ERCOT market to on-demand power sources. I look forward to continuing to work with my fellow commissioners to deliver the results on SB 3 that the legislature and the governor demand, and I look forward to delivering the results of that phase 2 market reform to the legislature and the governor for their consideration before the next legislative session. At this point, we're happy to take any questions.
How can you ensure the power will stay on this summer when we've already seen power plants trip offline due to heat, especially this weekend, and maintenance windows have shortened as a result of you canceling maintenance because of this recent heat?
I know the lights are going to stay on because of all the reforms we've put in place, and because that when we do encounter challenges like we saw last weekend, the multiple reforms are complementary and build off of each other to create even greater reliability. And that's how we know we can keep the lights on this summer.
Chairman Lake, we've been trying to get an interview with you or your office or another commissioner for the last 6 weeks. We need more transmission lines, and you guys are doing a lot to expedite that process. So how many lines do we need in addition to what's underway now? How long do you expect to relieve the congestion in places like Houston? And then what are you actually doing to make sure that the landowners are actually listened to beyond just them coming to the PUC meetings?
This commission took swift action last summer in advancing a large transmission line out of the Rio Grande Valley to connect that generation to the rest of the state and also ensure that those residents have access to other parts of the state's generation access. So that was swift action by this commission, utilizing a part of statute that had never been used before, unprecedented action to ensure reliability by building these new transmission projects. In addition, we're in the process of implementing new legislation that accounts for more variables in addition to economics, costs, and reliability to enhance our transmission planning and processing. That's in process now, but like all transmission projects, they're large and they take a long time.
What about the landowners, sir?
Landowners are an important part of transmission planning, and they're a key part of this. Routing transmission lines is always a tough balance between those landowners' rights and concerns and the need for the state for reliability. And this commission is very diligent and thorough in balancing all of those considerations in every transmission case we consider.
When we talk about setting new demand peaks almost every summer for the next 10 years, it makes sense because, Texas is growing. We're going to continue to set new records. The governor's office has stated that Texas has 15% more power generation capacity this year compared to last year. Would you mind just kind of walking us through what exact generation forms that's come from? Is that coming from renewables? Is it coming from thermal?
In just some round numbers alone, we have roughly, by the end of this year, we'll have roughly about another 9,000 megawatts of solar. In addition, we'll have, I said that wrong, we'll have 7,000 megawatts of solar. In addition, we'll have another 2,000 to 3,000 megawatts of wind generation and about 1,000 megawatts of natural gas generation. So you can see it's coming from a broad spectrum, but much of that additional generation is from the renewable side.
And I do have a quick question about the communication from this past weekend. On Friday, I know you were explaining that this was kind of a precautionary ask for conservation, but the language was pretty similar to previous conservation alerts. I was just wondering if, first of all, there's any concern that prematurely asking for conservation going forward could maybe urge Texans not to conserve, and maybe, you know, we didn't get another update from ERCOT itself on the Twitter accounts or on the website at all through the weekend. The only thing that was posted was on Friday. So do you think that communication could be maybe a little more clear going forward, especially, again, we're already setting records here in May. Do you think that communication could be a little more clear?
Communication can always be better. I agree. So we're looking back at that communication that we put out and making sure that we refine that language. I even stumbled over a second ago. This wasn't a conservation alert. It wasn't a conservation appeal. It was just a request to Texans to help us out over this weekend. So it wasn't that we're in a dangerous situation at all. It was to make sure that we're doing everything possible to keep the grid reliable. So we need to improve that language, and we'll commit to that. In addition, I think it would be good for us to have a communication at the end of one of these cycles to make sure that we respond, let everyone know where we are, and kind of give some feedback to what the response was like. And as I mentioned earlier, we saw roughly 300 to 400 megawatts of response out of Texans, and that is a great number for us to see. So that's why I was expressing my thanks earlier. Thanks for the question.
I was going to say, too, because ERCOT very clearly outlines on its website normal conditions versus conservation alert versus emergency levels. Do you think in the future, in a press release, maybe it could be included, like, what level we're currently at to just, again, make it more clear how dire the current situation is?
Good. That's a very good suggestion. I appreciate that.
And the important part is that this time we didn't wait until the emergency to request for conservation. 2, 3 years ago, that would not have been the case. This is part of ERCOT being and the PC being more proactive, more communicative with Texans to make sure that everybody knows the situation on the grid and what they can do to help ensure reliability.
Do you know why those 6 generators went offline on Friday and how that can be prevented as we expect more high temperatures?
Yes, we do. Now, the information related to those generation outages will be available to each of you tomorrow, on Thursday, on our website. So the front page of our website has a location for generation outages, so you can find out all the information that we currently have on why the units went out, what times they went out. Bottom line, we really don't have any concerns specifically with the various reasons. It was a coincidence of a number of units coming off at the same time, but the coincidence of that happened at or near peak. So the first unit came off around 12:30, the last one came off around 4 o'clock, and it was a combination of those 6 units, as well as a few smaller ones that we haven't mentioned so far, coming off near the same time that put us in this posture of sending out this request to consumers. Just wanted to make sure that we were informing consumers, as each of you have asked us to do, of what the condition is on the grid and what may be happening that we're watching. That's what we were trying to do, is make sure that you had the best information available.
Can you kind of walk us through in some detail what happened on Friday? Like, what did you know and when did you know it? I know you met with the governor earlier in the day. Was that just coincidental? What did you know? When did you know it on Friday?
That was highly coincidental, and that was his standard summer briefing on the same information we're presenting to you all today. And the turn of events with the tripping generators was something that developed, like Brad said, over a period of hours. 12:30 was the first one. Of course, one generator is not a problem. The second one was a bit later. Brad can go through the timetable on that, but it was completely unrelated, and as we saw, a cascading sequence of events over a period of hours, certainly not a discrete event at a moment in time.
And the key to what the chairman's talking about is that we suffered that type of a problem, and yet the condition of the grid did not go into any of our alert statuses. One of you mentioned, our different alert criterias. It did not go into an advisory, did not go into a watch, did not go into an emergency alert because we had prepared. So you asked for a sequence of events. We started about a week ahead of time, calling on generators to see if we could get their generation outages moved to a different time, making that additional generation available to everyone. By the time we arrived that morning, we've been meeting and talking with the chairman and other commissioners about the condition of the grid entirely throughout the week, making sure they understood what we were going to see that afternoon. We all felt very comfortable with what we were going to see that afternoon. Then when these generation outages occurred, because of that level of comfort, because of that preparation, because we are bringing on more generation reserves than we ever have in the past, that level of units coming offline did not create a condition which put us into any of those criterias for emergency. It's because we're taking these advanced actions. So our PRC, excuse for those of you that I need to explain this, but our physical responsive capability, which is the amount of generation that we can get in a short amount of time. It doesn't mean all of the generation that's available, but what can we get in a short amount of time? It did fall for just a few minutes below 3,000 to 2985, I believe was the number. But it was back within 30 minutes, and so it did not create a concern for us.
And it was back within 30 minutes because of the additional reserves we procured, that margin of safety. That's where we're able to deploy that. And those are the redundant layers that we're talking about and how these reforms complement and build on each other.
Does what happened on Friday call into concern just the overall approach to the grid, this idea of operating it conservatively? Is there some truth to the notion of, you can have too much in reserves and you're pushing the plants that are online too hard? Is there any indication that's what happened?
The outcome of the events on Friday is a testament and endorsement of the reforms that have been enacted as a result of SB 3 and a stark demonstration of how effective they are when faced with the combination of not one negative impact on the grid, but three. Record high demand, low wind, and a unique number of outages in quick succession. All three of those events occurring at one time is extremely rare, and yet the lights stayed on. Our grid was reliable, and we didn't even get into an emergency status.
What if that had happened in July or August when we had temperatures, in the triple digits?
We're prepared for that too, and that's why we do establish these margins of safety every day. Most days we don't need it, but the thing that's important is the days when we do need it, we've got those reserves. We bring those generators on sooner rather than later.
Speaking of that reserve capacity.
Before we go there, I do want to finish up this question. So one of the parts of the answer to your question is that during May, recall, we have a lot of generation that's on outage. A vast number of generation that is on outage for changing the oil, getting the units ready for the summer. We don't have that in the summer. And so that is an additional amount of generation that will be available to us in a matter of weeks. And that makes all the difference in the grid. Thank you.
When it comes to that reserve capacity, the SAR report this time has the percentage a lot lower than, say, the spring or last winter. And I know that you've changed the formula, sort of, to speak. So if you were able to use that for the spring, for what we just experienced, how would that impact it? So we can compare our buffer for summer versus our anticipated buffer in spring.
For your comparison, I would ask that you go back to the SARA for last summer. So you need to compare season to season. And you'll see that last summer has basically the same level of various scenarios. And in those various scenarios, you can compare off the improvements that you'll see in the grid this year.
Even though you guys have changed the formula now?
So
The report said that you considered other things or the generating units.
yeah, I don't believe that there's enough changes that would affect that comparison. So I think you can go back to that comparison and compare each of those scenarios one to one, and you'll see a significant amount of additional generation we have available this year.
I think what you're referencing is the effort by the commission, ERCOT, to come out with a new version, updated version of CDR-SAR, which I've asked Commissioner McAdams to spearhead, and he in fact had a meeting this morning on that with key stakeholders. That's a work in progress. We will always strive to continuously improve the products we put out for the public. for the purposes of this summer, like Brad said, it's apples to apples comparison. Is this Sarah for 2022 looking versus last summer's? And last summer, the planning reserve margin for the summer Sarah was 15.7% reserve margin. Going into this summer, we have a planning reserve margin of 22.8%. So a solid increase, as you can see.
Can you guys talk a little about, you said in the press release that everything should hold up under normal circumstances. What are some of those circumstances that might not be considered normal that could cause problems with the grid? And then I'll add a second question to that. You guys had mentioned that conservation ask was something that you guys are doing proactive. A lot of the people in the community of Houston that I spoke with took it as, all right, here comes ERCOT again, they can't do their job. So how do you change that public perception to realize that in your mind, that's proactive as opposed to ineffective?
Sure. So unusual circumstances, I define as 6 generators tripping off in a matter of a couple of hours. That's the kind of unusual circumstances that we prepare for, and that's why we build in these redundancies. Like Brad said, when circumstances dictated it, we issued the conservation request, and unlike in the past, we issued it for the entire weekend because we didn't want to do the whiplash of conserve for a few hours, now you can stop, back and forth. And we tried to be very clear and upfront with people about the hours when it was important and how they could contribute to help. After a tragedy like Uri, yes, absolutely, we must regain the trust of our customers, and we will. And this increased transparency, these proactive efforts are a part of that. And as always, conservation is a tool that we have used and will continue to use. And like Brad said, we'll continually improve the way we communicate with our customers, and we'll continuously strive to enhance reliability as we move forward.
Chairman, you mentioned phase 2 of market reforms. Is there anything in there that fulfills the governor's directive to allocate reliability costs to renewables?
That will be under consideration as we develop phase 2, but that was also addressed in our adoption of phase 1 in considering the ECRS, new ancillary service product. I apologize for the acronyms, but essentially the fast ramp product that is designed to offset the sunsetting and dropping solar, that cost will be, the commission decided will be assigned to the resources causing it, in this case, the intermittent resources.
What will be before you guys for this phase? Is that finalized yet at all? Or?
The blueprint that was adopted in December includes 2 components, the load side reliability mechanism and the backstop reserve service. We're in the process of building those market designs out. Both of those will put new steel in the ground, will incentivize new dispatchable generation and dispatchable resources in ERCOT, which the governor and the legislature have been very clear is a big priority. We are focused on that priority and delivering those results for the governor and the legislature by next session.
Who was involved in the deliberations over whether to issue the conservation call? Because that obviously is a thing that is not politically palatable right now. So who was involved in those discussions?
That's an operational call that comes from the ERCOT control room to Brad. Brad and I discuss and make a decision, and Brad and his team did an excellent job issuing that conservation call in a very, very short amount of time.
Can you address the grid's aging thermal fleet, and can it really depend on these older plants not to go down?
We are taking an all of the above approach to our grid. We want to leverage the benefits of all types of our resources, thermal, renewable, and new storage, distributed storage, and new technologies yet to be deployed. We're aware that we've got a aging thermal fleet, and that's very much the motivation of our phase 2 market reform efforts. And that's why we're moving the economics, moving the revenues in this market towards on-demand power. When Texans turn the light switch on, they need electricity. And that's why the phase 2 reforms are so focused on on-demand power.
And what's just your message to Texans? I mean, getting this notice this weekend in May, I know we've addressed the crazy high temperatures, but just what's your message to them not to have them worry about coming into the summer and power going off?
The reforms are working. The lights are going to stay on this summer, And thank you for playing your part in ensuring grid reliability. We're all part of this together. And the reforms are working. Yes.
I think that's one fear people have, though. They talk about the 6 plants already going down. That kind of ties into the aging infrastructure. Temperatures are expected to be hot this summer. I mean, come out and shout out, say it's going to work. I mean, is that something anybody can be sure of?
Absolutely. We've got over 700 generators in ERCOT. 6 of them had a bad day. And we've implemented all the reforms you heard me talk about. We've got a bigger reserve margin going into this summer than we had last summer. We got through last summer. We got through last winter. And we're going to get through this summer. We're better prepared than we ever have been before. This grid operator and this team is doing a great job managing for reliability first rather than crisis-based business model. And so that's how we can say with absolute confidence to Texans that the lights will stay on this summer.
When you talk about,
Chairman, can we take some questions on we got some reporters who are participating remotely. Josh is our moderator on the line. Can you take some questions on there?
Any questions, Josh and company?
Instructively right now, anybody on the phone have a question, press 1 and 0 on your telephone keypad. We have one person that's queued up. One moment till we gather their name. But once again, if you have a question, press 1 and 0 on your telephone keypad.
Josh, let us know if that question's queued up. In the meantime, we can continue to do some questions.
Looks like we did have somebody, we've gathered their name. We have a question from the line of Mose Luchelle. Please go ahead.
Yeah, hi there. Thanks for taking the question. One question I had was, you keep saying that you didn't have to declare an energy emergency alert, but had you done that, my understanding is it would have signaled to utilities to issue push notifications and do their own conservation that they didn't have to do in the absence of such an alert. So, I mean, shouldn't you have actually done an alert just in order to conserve? Wouldn't that have led to more conservation? I don't understand. You might not have reached the threshold, but if conservation was the goal, wouldn't that have made more sense?
Yeah, we didn't feel like we needed to go to that level, Mose. What we did do is several of the utility partners called us and asked us, and we didn't ask any of them to take that next step, but we did indicate to them that it was on their own decision making if they decided to take that next step. Many of them did, but we didn't issue the full conservation alert because we didn't feel like it went to that level of necessity.
I think that also maybe for a lot of us in the media, this has been kind of a confusing thing given the amount of media coverage there was around the winter cold fronts that we had, where there was some concern about grid stability. We got tighter on the grid last Friday than during any of those events, but as has been mentioned in the past, there was very little communication. What went into that? Like, why that big difference? Why all the press conferences and all the attention during the winter, and then this kind of relative silence this time around?
The winter events were broader than just power grid related. That's the activation of the State Operations Center and the corresponding media interaction was through the State Operations Center. So I'd have to defer to them on how they manage that. As always, we are available. We continue to do these seasonal press conferences. And as you saw last week, we're being more proactive about communicating with Texans when grid conditions are tight and when they can play a role in conserving power.
One last thing, if you don't mind, and I think you were asked this earlier, but these operating with large capacity margins for months and months, these power plants are being asked to stay available to levels not seen before the last big blackout. Is that leading to a risk of greater surprise breakdowns like we saw on Friday, when these machines need to be taken offline sometimes to be maintained? We've heard reports that some of them are being asked to stay online when they maybe shouldn't.
No concerns at all. Power plants staying online is part of our additional reserves. And like I said, we do that every day because we never know when we'll need that additional margin of safety. We needed it on Friday, and it was incredibly important to have at that moment in time. So we'll continue to maintain that margin of safety, but we're also continuously working with our generators to ensure that they can take adequate maintenance outages, and most importantly, that the ones that work with ERCOT, like Brad mentioned, the generators who delayed outages to be ready for last Friday, we're ensuring that ERCOT prioritizes those generators to make sure that the ones that run when we need them the most are in front of the line for maintenance outages, so all of our generator fleets are ready for this coming summer. Any other questions on the phone?
Yes. Our next question is from the line of Shelby Webb. Please go ahead.
Hi there. Speaking about the extra reserve generation that ERCOT has been purchasing, how much is that costing ratepayers compared to previous years, and what can we expect to see for the rest of the year?
The cost increase of the additional reserves we've procured starting last June through May totals to just about $1 per household per month. So Texans for $1 per month are receiving a vastly more reliable grid to ensure that the lights stay on.
Could you give me an exact dollar figure for that then? Is that, where are we talking, $40 million?
I don't have the total dollar figure in front of me. I think it's roughly $380 million that calculates out to 99.5 cents per household per month.
Well, continuing that going on, are those prices expected to increase as we go through the summer and continue to purchase more reserves? Or will the market reports proposed in KHOU take care of some of these extra reliability costs?
We'll continue purchasing the extra reserves. We do not expect those costs to increase above that, much more or below that $1 per household per month. And in fact, that $1 per household per month includes the dramatic increase in natural gas prices, which of course are unrelated to the power grid. So if anything, if gas prices decrease, those numbers should decrease as well.
Sure. And do you think that the SARA and CDR reports are accurately accounting for extreme weather scenarios and increase out the sort of unusual or abnormal weather like we've seen in the past week or so?
Yeah, the CDR and SARA evaluate a wide variety of scenarios, including extra high demand for power. So yes, that's exactly what they are, scenario analysis. They're not predictions. They're nothing more than arithmetic, and they certainly don't take into full account the multitude of reforms we've implemented. They're a useful tool, but just that, a tool.
People shouldn't take too much out of them. Like, they shouldn't place all their stuff on them.
Can you repeat that?
So it's just arithmetic and it's a tool that people shouldn't be basing a lot of decisions on them. Is that what you're saying? Like, I'm just sort of trying to ask about like the relevance then.
I'm sorry, what's the question? I mean, the relevance towards what?
Well, towards the SARA and CDR reports, if they're just sort of arithmetic and they're not taking into account a lot of these reforms, sort of, are they relevant?
Yeah, so this is Brad again. What we want to make sure is that we're giving you the information and the information to all Texans that they need, that they want to see. We want to make sure that you're seeing what our expected case is, and we've given you that. We want you to see what an extreme event might look like, and we've given you that. And if you went back to the SARA for spring, you'll see an extreme event on heat that looks very similar to what we just went through. So that's how you can use the information, just to provide you some level of comfort. Really, the focus should be on what our expected case is. And that's where we've delivered, and I think it's a very good story.
Josh, as we move on with questions, can you ask the callers to identify the organization they're representing, please?
Sure, I can definitely do that.
Thank you.
Our next question is the line of Bill
Jankowski with the Dallas Morning News here. Similar question to one that Mo had. With the hot weather arriving so much earlier than expected, and as was reported in the Texas Tribune this morning, it's some of the power plants tripping off on Friday, being ones that were under maintenance, preparing for the summer. So my question is there any worry about these power plants not having enough time, not being able to complete necessary maintenance in time for a peak demand in the summer, and if ERCOT and the PUC are doing anything to address that?
Yeah, so great, and I appreciate the question. We're working with the generators to make sure that they have the amount of time that they need to make sure that the units are ready for this summer. In fact, one of those units that was asked to move their outage is now entering into its own outage so that it can do the work that they needed to do for the summer. The condition of those units, yeah, I'm always concerned when we see quite a few units go off at the same time. I'm always concerned about the condition of these units. We have to make sure that we have the right incentives in place in our market to both attract and retain new generation of that very type, of that dispatchable type. And so I know that the chairman is working on that through their phase 2. All of the commissioners are working on that effort through phase 2. And we're working to make sure, as you asked, that generators have the outage time they need to get their equipment in good shape for the summer. Thank you.
And importantly, Phil, I'll note that as ERCOT takes control of the outage schedule, that their proposed methodology for next fall provides 15% more time for outages than were actually taken last fall by these generators. So there'll be, in fact, be more time for outages, not less. We're just making sure the outages don't all happen at once.
And if I may, I've got another question. I just wanted to see if, because as Brad had reported about a month ago, or sometime last month, cryptocurrency being, on such a rise and planning to add tremendous amounts of demand to the grid over the next couple of years, is there, is that part of what goes into this SARA report, and do you guys have any concern about this continued added demand from a very electricity-intensive process?
Thank you for the question. So we have roughly about 300 to 400 megawatts of cryptocurrency in Texas today. We did check their performance throughout this event. They performed admirably, as we would have expected them to. And so from that perspective, we don't have a concern. We have started a process to really look at how those loads are interconnected to our system to make sure that we're getting as much value out of them as possible. And that process includes a task force that has brought many of those partners together, those Bitcoin and cryptocurrency type developers together. They've been very cooperative with us, and we look forward to being able to resolve those outstanding questions.
So are you saying that during the time when the conservation request was issued, did you see a lot of those guys willingly just kind of shut down what they were doing temporarily?
They operated as we would have expected under that condition, yes.
All right, that's all I got. Thanks, guys.
Maybe one more question from the phone line, Josh?
We have no further questions from the phone line.
All right, any other questions here at the commission office?
Do y'all have any concerns about market manipulation, given that all these plants came off at relatively the same time?
No concerns at this time, but our independent market monitor is tasked with investigating any potential market manipulation, and if they see signs of trouble, they'll report it to the commission through the appropriate process.
Can you explain the two extreme risk scenarios where there would not be enough power in the report?
From the Sarah?
Sure. So as you look across those extreme scenarios, and even the first page, which has more moderate scenarios, you'll see that we change one of the variables to an extreme level. And then as you go across that page, we'll add a second extreme variable. And by the third item, that third column, there are 3 extreme scenarios occurring at one time. So as you can imagine, as you go across that chart, there's lower and lower probability of those things occurring. Our main three variables are generation outages, low wind or renewable output, and high heat, or in the cold, very cold temperatures. So those are the extremes that we adjust each time. And so that last category, that last column, has all three of those in the extreme. And yes, we do see some concerns in that category, but it is a very unlikely scenario. And so as you move back away from that, one or two of these, high heat, even high generation outages, we seem fairly comfortable as we move up that ladder. But as we said before, these are just studies to give you a sense, to give you a level of comfort, and that's the most extreme of the extreme.
Can you explain the OCN that's still in place versus what went out this past weekend versus if you are in an emergency situation, what do people at home experience? Is it alerts on their phones, alerts on TV? How do they know? How do we differentiate between proactive and actual emergency?
So the way people at home will learn is really through each of you. So we're communicating with the media to try to make sure that you know that if we move from a current normal status into an alert status, that you should, or an advisory, I should say, that's the first level, that you should get information on that advisory and what that means. The OCN is really just within the industry. It's an operational condition notice. It's just for us to communicate to transmission and generation companies to tell them something they probably already know. But in this case, it's getting really hot. Prepare for the heat.
Importantly, your point about a true emergency condition is in addition to an entirely different set of circumstances in which, in addition to communicating with you all in the media, the PUC and ERCOT would utilize TDIM's communication system with local mayors, counties, and also leverage the TxDOT and DPS messaging system across the state. That's a function of new legislation from last session to ensure that if we do get in a truly dire emergency situation, there are multiple points of contacts with all Texans, from state leadership down to local and city leadership. So if we do get in that situation, it will be a much, much more robust form of communication.
Mr. Chairman, there's a couple of reporters who haven't been able to get through due to technical issues on their end, I guess. Noreen Malik with Bloomberg News asks, given the record heat conditions in May in Texas and the drought, is the extreme demand scenario more of a possibility than the top-line Sarah view? I've heard from power experts who say that the report is downplaying the reality of what the state is experiencing.
I think those predictions are based on data from ERCOT.
Certainly I can't forecast the weather during the summer. I can't do that several months in advance. There's every indication that we'll be facing a very hot summer. So that could mean that we're up that scale. But we provided each of you through the SARA information of what each of those potential load scenarios might be. There's a high case for high forecasted load. There's an extreme case for extreme forecasted load. So you have the information you need. And do I think it's going to be a hot summer? I do think it's going to be a hot summer. Sure facing that way. Could I be surprised by some rainstorms that come in this weekend and cool things down? I certainly could be and would be gladly surprised by that. Thank you.
Most importantly, we need to be prepared for every weather scenario, hot, cold, and in between. And that's what we're ready for.
Yes.
And Mitchell Furman with Texas Tribune asks, why did they decide to call for conservation on Friday at 5 p.m.? Was it because Governor Abbott made the decision late afternoon on Friday?
As we've discussed, the decision was made as a result of the cascading sequence events. The final generator trip was around 4 p.m.
Yes, sir. So I believe we've answered that question, yeah. Mitch, and I'm sorry that you didn't get that answer earlier, but we have answered it. It had to do with the sequence of events that occurred on Friday. Looking forward, not knowing whether those units would be able to make it back to the system over the weekend, we called for conservation on Saturday and Sunday. But fortunately, those units did return.
Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.